If you ask me, political and financial issues aside, these gentlemen need some serious fashion advice. First time to town, farm boys? I think my grandfather was buried in one of those suits. I have a word of English they should all take the time to learn. Podcasts.
What's happening, Hellspawn? Welcome to Spawnography, the podcast where my co-host and I read every issue of Spawn in order and talk about it, mostly in order. My name's George Marston. My pronouns are they, them, or she, her, and my co-host is
Pierce Ladden. I'm they, them as well. How you doing, George?
You know, I'm kicking ass, taking names. How about you, my friend?
Well, I'm all out of bubble gum, right? That's how that goes.
I think so. I'm here to kick ass and chew bubble gum. And I'm all out of bubble gum. Roddy Piper.
Oh boy, these are some issues that we're going to get into. We're getting into Spawn number 19 and 20. I don't think there's been any new Spawn news since the last time we recorded.
Not any big things, I don't think. They haven't.
No, nothing crazy. Have you had a good weekend? A good week?
Yeah, I had a great one. I saw Dune 2 last weekend. It was incredible.
I saw Dune 2 this weekend, and it was incredible.
Yeah.
70mm, baby. Village East. Love that theater.
I don't know if mine was set. Mine probably wasn't. It was probably digital, whatever. But it was really fun, and I saw it on a huge screen, and I loved it. Loved these issues a little less. The word problematic gets thrown around a lot these days. But in 2024, 30 years on, these issues are frankly bizarre.
Yeah, there's some housekeeping to do. Each of these issues ends with a page that says, the official Spawn guide to reading Spawn issues 18 to 25. So we've gotten into it a little bit, but the image books in the early days, most of them were delayed. Spawn itself would come out basically monthly. It was kind of like 5 to 6 weeks, but that was better than pretty much every other image book. By the time all the other image books were at issue 3, Spawn was already at issue 5. So Todd was the most consistent, and I think that that's a big reason that Spawn becomes more of a flagship character than really any of the other image creations, save probably Savage Dragon as like the other one. The other kind of also ran with Spawn.
I guess Wildcats, we don't need to get into it.
Well, then even Wildcats, though, I always associate it more with Wildstorm specifically because
That's
it sort
fair.
of like
Wildstorm.
breaks off, you know?
That's
so
fair. Good point.
The official Spawn guide to reading Spawn issues 18 to 25 says, you already have issues 1 to 18. Plus issues 21 to 24. You just bought 19. Next week, issue 25 will be out. Buy it, but don't read it yet. The following week, 20 will ship. Buy it, but don't read it yet. Now, reread issues 1 to 25 in order. Believe it or not, it'll all make sense. 3 issues in 3 weeks. Believe it or not, it'll all make sense. Thanks, Todd. And then it says, all of this happened because... And there's like this nice cartoon that says Todd can't count.
Wait a minute. I don't mean to interrupt you like this so early, but just I have to understand. Because honestly, I don't have the historical perspective on this. Are you telling me that Spawn 25 came out before 19 and 20?
No. Here's the order of publication. 1 through 18. 21, 22, 23, 24, 19, 25, 20, 26.
What?
However, this story does fit in at the time that we're reading it, which is why we're reading it now. We're not reading in release date. We're reading in the intended order. Right. And that's why they said, just hold on to the issues. Don't read them. And then read them in order.
Homie, I have dyscalculia. Do you understand how fucking confusing that is for me? You basically just said like, well, they published 32, 47, 86, 99, 1 million. And I'm just like, thank God I wasn't reading at the time. I would never have survived that. I would have just been like, I can't understand this. Oh my God. That's wild.
Yeah.
That's,
So
I'm, I'm beside myself. Please
the
continue. I'm so
reality
sorry.
of these two issues is that you could never read them and they would never matter. Because the elements, as we'll get into, the elements of this book never really crop up ever again, except in a completely different comic book that has nothing to do with Spawn besides these two issues. So,
Oh my God.
yeah.
These comics, these two issues, especially coming after Grant Morrison showing kind of like the greatest hits of Spawn in a great way, these two issues feel like Spawn's like worst mistakes all on display in like the speed run.
I will say also, did you think that Todd McFarlane was a bad writer before this? Because comparatively,
Look, I know that there are two writers credited, Tom Orzechowski and Andrew Grossberg, correct?
yes, correct.
So I don't know how much each did. I don't know if like maybe Orzechowski plotted it and the other guy scripted it, Andrew Grossberg, or if it was the other way around, or if they both were just had their hands in it. But look, whatever the case is, Tom Orzechowski is an incredible letterer.
We can at least say that.
Not as great at deciding what the letters are gonna say, it seems.
All right,
But
so let's get into the credits, I
I will
think.
take nothing away from his main skill here, just to say. We'll get into the credits and we'll get into more of this because, oh, it's really something.
So, Spawn number 19, Image Comics presents Showtime, Part 1, story by Tom Orzechowski and Andrew Grossberg, pencils by Greg Capullo, inks by Mark Pennington, copy editor and letters by Tom Orzechowski, colors by Steve Oliff and Oleoptics. Oleoptics is Tracy Anderson, Stacey Cox, Patty Stratton Jordan, Kirk Mobert, Marie St. Clair, Mo Sampson, Quinn Suplee, Christ Wolf, Breck Blackford, Candace McCasland, Robin Robertson, Leah Rude, and William Zindel. Director of Creative Development, Terry Fitzgerald, and Graphics Coordinator, Julia Simmons. Dedicated to Chris Claremont.
Hey, all right.
Which, sorry, Chris. but also kind of cool because Orzechowski's worked on quite a few Chris Claremont scripts. So
Sure, great. You know,
fun little
maybe
there.
that's the connection is that Orzechowski and Claremont are known to each other. Claremont, of course, everybody knows who that is. If you're listening to this and you don't know who Chris Claremont is, well, he wrote X-Men
Worked
for
on
like
Miss
24
Marvel.
years or something. Yeah, I worked on Miss
Oh,
Marvel.
really?
Created Mystique.
Yep.
Creator of
Created,
co-creator
like,
at least.
created like half the shit that we care about.
Yeah. So yeah, here are two issues. The first of which so like we said, it says co-plotted by Orzechowski and Andrew Grossberg. Andrew Grossberg didn't write a lot of comics. The ones
So I
he
dug
did
into this.
write, yeah. Pierce, tell me what you found out about Andrew Grossberg because I'm not that familiar with him as a writer or a creator.
So I Googled Andrew Grossberg comics, and after most things just mention that he wrote issues 19 and 20 of Spawn. So for all intents and purposes, these are the two most popular issues he ever wrote. But it does lead you to his LinkedIn. And to put it kindly, Andrew Grossberg is a Web3 professional. Are you familiar with what Web3 is, George?
Oh, very much so. Web3, for our listeners who maybe aren't, is basically the version of the internet that is based around NFTs and cryptocurrency and the blockchain. And that's really the very simple TLDR. But yes, it's NFTs and blockchain shit, basically.
Yeah. So to go through his LinkedIn a little bit, he's essentially
He's
like
gonna love this when he hears it, because I'm sure he will.
Uh, oh yeah, I guess if he's got a Googler for his name, it might pop up. to go through it, he's a project director for a startup for homeschool families, a creative consultant for NFTs, a game designer for Web3 games, freelance world builder for NFT card game and
Freelance world
online
builder.
NFT game.
I think that usually means dungeon master. I
Yeah,
mean, I guess it's
exactly.
connected to an NFT game, but like that's what you put. I've been a freelance world builder for 25 years now.
But then if you scroll all the way down, oh, I mean, he's been a QA tester for EA. He was a US editor for Tripwire Mag. I mean, this guy has a pretty storied
Newsarama won some
career.
Tripwire awards in the UK Tripwire awards recently, though, not
Didn't
during that
didn't
time.
didn't we win a Tripwire award? We got one.
Newsarama did, yeah.
Yeah.
Newsarama won 2 or 3 at different times, but UK ones, I think. Maybe a US
Good
one
for
in there
us.
too. Yeah, award-winning, hard-hitting journalism every day
Yeah.
at Newsarama, whose opinions are not reflected in this podcast.
But in 1993, 1994, he was a freelance writer and editor. And it says, I wrote issues 19 and 20 of the comic Spawn, which together sold over 500,000 copies. I wrote and edited entries in the Spawn Bible. I wrote, edited, trafficked, and published the comic miniseries Daring Escapes through Image Comics. Have you ever heard of Daring Escapes, George?
No, I actually haven't. I have the smallest guess of what it really is, but it's probably bad.
It's not that bad. I didn't read the whole thing. I started reading it just to get some context on what it is. So this issue of Spawn, these issues of Spawn come out in 1994, ended 1994. Daring Escapes comes out 4 years later. It comes out in 1998. It is also co-written with Tom Orzechowski. It is about Houdini. It is about exactly the same Houdini who appears in this story. And all of the story elements that kind of pop up here that are not specifically Spawn related do kind of pop up again, or at least are referenced.
That's so much. Listen, okay, this is maybe a known fact about me to my friends or something. When I was a little kid, Harry Houdini was my idol. I loved Harry Houdini. The first thing I wanted to be, that I can remember anyway when I was a kid, was an escape artist. And I used to like make my mom tie me into like straitjackets and like made out of my shirts and stuff like that and try to work my way out of like boxes. And anyway, I thought I was going to grow up to be an escape artist. It is so weird the way Harry Houdini is portrayed here. It is so strange the way they've chosen to basically have him exist in this world. If you know anything about Harry Houdini, your alarm bells are going to be going off. This is an entirely fictionalized Houdini. We've all had that thought of like, what if Houdini had some spiritual or magical ability? I think that's kind of anathema to the man that he was, but we'll get into it as the story goes on. I'm not going to rant about it. I just think it's really something, the way Houdini is used here. And also the way Spawn is treated in connection to Houdini is very strange.
It's all very weird. We're going to open up on this first page. I will say also, I don't think that Greg Capullo fully... One, I don't love Pennington's inks on Capullo.
Not as good as Panosian and Tibert.
And Art Tibert. But I think also he was like, what is this story?
It's rough.
Yeah.
I'm going to say, the way I talked about Houdini, that's vaguely disrespecting the memory of one entertainer. This is so weirdly offensive to everyone who's not from America, specifically people from Japan, Ukraine, even Russia. Israel comes up in this issue. In 2024, reading this was like a fever dream. It was like, was this written by a MAGA hat or something? It's so strange.
If you had to describe this to somebody, it sounds made up. But we're gonna open on this first page with Houdini newspaper clipping that has just introducing the idea that Houdini exists. What's happening in that section of the page kind of has nothing to do with anything else happening with the other section of the page, which is in a bunker under Nagasaki. There's men of influence from religion, business, and the military focus their energies basically to like go to hell, like to go to like a sort of purgatory state.
Yeah, essentially what we're seeing here. I know we're gonna breeze through this a little bit, but I
Yeah,
have to say how fucked up it is. First off, the Houdini thing comes up at the very end of this story. We see the trick he's performing here kind of realized at the end of the story. It's a stupid gimmick. This idea that a bunch of like Japanese leaders gathered under Nagasaki to somehow open a portal to another realm under threat of a second atomic bomb is so fucked up. I just want to say that. It's so fucked up. That's all I have to say. I think everyone listening knows why. I
yeah,
won't bog us down every time something super fucked up happens, but to get through this, I have to say that's fucked up.
yeah. We meet a demon named percentage sign little like exponent caret
It's an
2.
unpronounceable name. It's like a bunch
Well,
of symbols with a number.
in Daring Escape, their names are just 2 and 9, but
Okay.
they are portrayed this way. So this demon's name is 2 for all intents and purposes. As we turn the page, it's a mushroom cloud. I mean,
Yeah, the
that
bomb
is
is
what it
going
is.
off.
That's what they've escaped essentially by going to hell. Uh, and then years later, we see Al Simmons in the Soviet Union being a world famous government assassin.
So there's something we kind of breached this. They're actually not in hell. They're in a third
Yeah,
place. They're basically like cosmic abominations that exist outside of hell and heaven. It's somewhat
it's a
important,
place called the Overlap.
the overlap, and you can kind of guess what that's supposed to mean. And part of the reason they're fascinated by this is because they see the power of an atomic bomb can destroy beings from hell. That's why they're observing this. And
Right.
that plays into what happens later as they try to recreate that by trapping Al Simmons in an atomic blast. That becomes their mission later. So we cut to Al Simmons, world famous murderer.
We cut to Al Simmons. I will also say, like, and I generally really love Capullo, but the fact that we have to have Orzechowski adding arrows to get us through anytime there's arrows,
It's
I'm
not great.
like, somebody didn't understand the assignment, and I assume that the script was not super clear about how these pages were supposed to be laid out. And
Yeah.
also, Capullo's trying to make them look cool.
Yeah.
I'll say one thing that's really interesting through 19 issues of Spawn. We don't ever really we vaguely get to see Al exist as a human.
Yeah.
I was reading an article about homage covers
Mm.
and Spawn's kind of role and Image Comics' role in that as well.
Mm-hmm.
And one thing that was very interesting, and the two of us are not the two to speak about this, but that despite Al being black, he's basically denied his blackness through the fact that he never interacts with anybody in his like real body.
Right.
Even as Spawn, he's sort of like a zombie head.
And there's the gimmick
Uh,
early on where he can only transform into a white man. He can't take his
yeah,
original
and
human form.
I would love to get somebody smarter than us, with more relevant experience to speak about that. I do
Yeah.
think that's something really interesting,
Yeah.
especially
It's hard to
considering
process, though. Honestly, as a white person, like it's hard to process.
it's just interesting that like we were very quick to say, oh, one of the most famous black superheroes, but he's a superhero that almost doesn't exist
Right.
as black. Anyway, interesting. Just an aside, because this is an extended sequence of us getting to see him as a human,
Right.
which is rare.
And what's happening is he's assigned to kill these Ukrainian scientists who escape because he's spotted and he has to run away. He barely makes it out with his life. And these Ukrainian scientists who are working on atomic bombs will come up later in this issue as basically the villains who are trying to detonate an atomic device in New York City in order to catch Spawn in it so that the overlap and its denizens can figure out if atomic energy will consistently kill creatures from hell. And also, in order to kill Harry Houdini, who has managed to access the overlap, which they don't like. That's the basic premise of these two issues. And that's hardly communicated. It's very vague. So I wanted to lay it out really simply and straightforward. That's what we're dealing with. There's a lot that goes into that. And there's a lot of very weird twists and turns and plot aspects. But that's the basic premise. There's also an American guy who loves setting off bombs. And what he's trying to do is kill the unhoused people and the denizens of the alley alongside Spawn.
Yeah, that part, I was just like, oh, his whole goal is to just kill the folks that are living there. That sucks.
It's really
He's like
weird
the worst.
because
He's like the worst Danny Pennington.
he's like the fucking Nightmare Realm version of Danny Pennington. And as obviously that's pretty fucked up that, we don't blame the writer for the actions of a villain in the story. It is a fucked up motive. It's also kind of a stupid execution because this kid is apparently detonating bombs outside of his own apartment building because he's sick of seeing these unhoused people.
Yeah, it doesn't make like a ton of sense.
He tries to blow up Spawn with a shopping cart full of like explosives and looks like liquor bottles and stuff. Spawn catches fire and runs after the kid. But who should stop Spawn? None other than Harry Houdini, who says, "We need to talk, Hell's Pawn," which seems like the one kind of clever little bit of scripting that they got in there is that Hellspawn becomes Hell's Pawn, which obviously that's what he is. It's not that clever. It's a little obvious, but that's maybe the best it gets.
It is a thing that Todd will call back to a bunch of times anyway.
Right.
I think it's funny that Al yells "You're meat" at the kid instead of dead meat. I don't know. It seems weird.
We're back to Spawn talking kind of like the margin notes of a Frank Miller script.
Mm-hmm. I think the shorthand sometimes for when you don't know what Spawn's voice is just like have him act like a tough guy.
Yeah.
And Grant had brought him out of that a little bit, where he's kind of this Spider-Man Batman pastiche, which is what he is.
Right.
But yeah, we lose that altogether here. There's some fun cartooning, like I don't think this is a great Capullo issue by any stretch, but there's some fun stuff. There's some fun shots.
To do what he can with it.
I very much like on the next page we're seeing little Ukraine, right? We're seeing the different. The narration is talking about the different sections in New York.
The melting pot of Manhattan. I like grab random pieces from all over the earth and throw them together on a small island. This gives you Manhattan and makes it the greatest city in the world. Just boy, what writing? What prose? I mean, like that's anyway.
I love this panel with the kid with the headphones blowing a bubble.
Yeah,
with like the old guys in the background kind of talking.
So this is how we get the connection between the kid who's blowing up bombs and the Ukrainian scientists.
Porsche McNeil.
Porsche McNeil. Yep. What a great name. So Porsche McNeil has this connection to the Ukrainian scientists. They're coming into town, and we get our talking heads. Our CNN lady is saying, for the first time ever, nuclear scientists from the former Soviet bloc nations will be meeting with their global counterparts in an informal setting in a 3-day conference. So basically, exactly what it says. For the first time, it's a meeting of U.S. and Soviet bloc atomic scientists. No way this could blow up.
Our entertainment reporter is remarking on their fashion sense, and our conspiracy guy is having he thinks everything is a photo op, everything's a conspiracy. I will say this, I think that the talking heads work really well for and I apologize to Tom Orzechowski and Andrew Grossberg in advance, whoever wrote the script specifically. It seems like Grossberg, since he wants to take a lot of credit for it on his LinkedIn.
Right.
I do think that the talking heads are a great crutch for when you just need to speed through a bunch of exposition and get it out on the page so that the reader is aware of it.
Yeah. The 5 talkback guy here is, once again, his opinions are inscrutable. He says, he's basically saying, like, why do they fly all this way to talk about A-bombs when the people of Ukraine, he calls it the Ukraine, which we know why that's fucked up, when the people of Ukraine are starving and facing oppressive unemployment and horrible inflation. And then he says, why don't they just keep selling us the bombs? Which, what? Okay.
I mean, I like that he's also like, we're never going to use them.
Yeah. He's like, we just want to keep having them. So they carry all this luggage. It's all these parts of a bomb. We get to a point where the Ukrainian scientists are in America. They've arrived in certainly a pre-Giuliani version of Times Square, where there's still a red light district. And he says, one of them says, we've arrived. And the other one says, a truly magnificent result of a free society. And the other one says, a truly magnificent result of breeding, too, which is a disgusting comment.
Yep.
They go inside this strip club where they lament that their profession as nuclear scientists is dying and that they'll never get to see one of their bombs detonated, setting the seed for the overlap to observe them actually setting off a bomb.
I mean, I've seen Oppenheimer. He invented a bomb.
He did.
And he didn't want to detonate it.
No, he didn't.
So these are pretty bad guys.
These are, yeah. Even by atomic bomb guy standards, these ones are pretty bad. Definitely they're kind of a neutral evil alignment here, where they're just like, we just want to see it happen for its own sake.
So one of the things in reading this, you're the writers of this book. You've read 15, 20, almost 20 issues of Spawn at this point, right? What's going through your head that
another?
Yeah. What's going through your head that this is the story that you want to tell? Like how did we get here?
I have 2 opinions on that.
Sure.
One of them is, these are very Stan Lee-esque plots. These are very like Silver Age comics, like communist scientists. They're not communists. Well, I guess technically they are, but no longer former Soviet, former communist nation scientists. There's a little bit of, well, not a little bit, there's a lot of Red Scare in this, which was a very prominent, like, basic superhero comic element that I think some writers can't think their way out of even today. There's still a lot of that, like, kind of being tossed around. Even in, like, the MCU, you still get, like, the flashback to the Soviet, esque.
Whiplash and whatnot.
Right. And so I think it's that. I think it's a little bit of not being able to think past that. And also, I think basically judging on the fact that Andrew Grossberg goes on to basically use this as the pilot for his own little Houdini spinoff, I think that's what it is. I think it's like when you get the Married with Children episode that only has Al in it for like one scene, and then the rest of it is about the other family that they think they're going to do another show about that's going to fail. So,
and then they make Modern Family.
Well, so the other thing that's kind of wacky about this, I don't even know what to say about it, is they're saying, like, we need to speak with Israel. Their bombs are efficient. I bet there's a shame they must keep their atomic bomb program a secret, which, like, good Lord, even in the early 90s, the politics of saying that are bizarre. Obviously, Free Palestine and the genocide. 2024 is when we need to say that and think about that. It's just a weird thing to say in a comic book, because then they also go on to talk about Gaddafi and Muammar Gaddafi being able to make them rich men.
The other thing too is that it's weird that they don't just, if we're thinking about the Cold War is very much over at this point, so I wonder if it's more of, well, if this is like a Cold War plot, which is kind of what this is, right? This would be the plot of like an 80s James Bond. Oh, somebody's got a bomb and they're going to set it off, right?
Exactly.
Is that keeping in line with like Todd's sort of like apolitical bent, where he's like, oh no, I'm not going to get into like current events and I'm not going to get into stuff except in the letters column, as we've like seen.
Right.
But based Todd, is doing a Cold War plot like, oh, it's not political because this is over already. This can't happen, rather than just straight up doing a Middle East thing because that would be the more recent relevant thing. I
Maybe
don't know.
so. It's possible. I mean, honestly, it's hard to understand. It's a little inscrutable. Obviously, what they're trying to show here is that these men are totally amoral in their pursuit of having a bomb set off, so much so that they will foster and sell bombs to both Israel and Muammar Gaddafi in the early 90s, of course, dictator of Libya. It's just very strange and it's kind of uncomfortable to read now, especially. And I think you're right that it's maybe trying to modernize a Cold War element, but it just comes off as very kind of broadly nihilistic in a strange way.
It's also the kind of threat that Spawn's not come up against. Even though his battle is between good and evil and heaven and hell, it's all felt pretty amorphous in its effect on the world, you know? Even though, and we're coming, if we're reading this in order, as we were instructed to do, right? This is coming right after Anti-Spawn, where we know that there's a portal to hell and like there's all this
All this other
stuff in the
stuff.
world, and this just introduces new elements that like Spawn's never really had to deal with this. I guess he did as a world famous government assassin, but it's crazy to kind of bring it back.
When we think about that, we also have to remember theoretically that Spawn died before the fall of the Berlin Wall in this timeline in like
True.
1985. So later, when he's yelling commies, atomic commies, or some shit like
Yeah,
that,
yeah.
it's because that's still who he is at that time. It's, I guess, a callback to that. Again, I don't know. The whole thing in 2024 just makes me feel uncomfortable and confused and a little bit like, why did this need to be the plot of anything? It really feels like a very early Iron Man adventure where it's like Soviet scientists are coming from Russia with special magnet, and it turns out it's actually the Crimson Dynamo and he's a terrorist or some shit like that.
Yeah. Or like a Defenders plot where it's like very weird. Yeah, that's
It's
that
just
old school Marvel thing.
strangely jingoistic. The portrayal of Ukrainians and these scientists is very Red Scare, and throwing in all this other politics with that is just very strange to me, especially in pursuit of this what the story ultimately is, because most of this issue, as they decide that they're going to blow up the atomic bomb at the conference after getting Porsche McNeil to repair its detonator, to
Right.
build it a detonator, most of this issue is spent on Spawn and Houdini just talking about magic. Houdini teaches Spawn that his costume can conjure things if he knows how to do it. There's a moment where,
Which we've heard Cagliostro already speak about, right?
yes,
Where he keeps saying where Cagliostro in that Neil Gaiman issue, and I do think that this is where I'm like, okay, then here's where this is maybe a little bit fun. There's a
right.
much more fun something in here than what
There
we
is
get.
something fun in here. And the Houdini tutoring Spawn in the ways of magic is pretty interesting. Again, I just want to say Houdini would have felt this was stupid
Yeah,
and would have been probably, I don't know if he'd been offended by it, but certainly he had a mission to expose spiritualism and the thought of like this kind of magic as a fraud. How he viewed it as fantasy, I can't say. I don't know that deeply because I don't think it's been discussed too much. But it's just a little weird to me to be a super fan of Houdini and then to connect him to like a master of magic. And he says it's beyond spiritualism and stuff. Nonetheless, it's just a little weird. We're going to get beyond that because that's what this comic is. And this is a totally fictional version of Houdini.
I'll say also that this kind of plot doesn't play to Capullo's strengths. When we see the overlap for the first time, it's sort of like Capullo doing Ditko doing Doctor Strange stuff by half, and
Yeah, it's
it looks bad.
someone who doesn't naturally have that vision trying to copy it and it doesn't work out. I think that it's, trying to be a non-Euclidean kind of thing and it just comes off as like just a weird jagged kind of nonsense. It's not Capullo's fault. It's not a great script. I'm sure that
Yeah, I don't think it's his fault at all.
On the other hand, when we turn the page and we see this demon's face up close, I really love that panel of the demon's like snarling, kind of beaky kind of face with his tongue sticking out. That's maybe the best part to me of Capullo's handling of the overlap. The next panel down, it just kind of looks like a third-rate version of the cantina scene or something.
Yeah. I mean, those are kind of fun. I think that Capullo can do cool like creature and monster designs and horror stuff, and we will see more of that in the future. Again, this just like overall doesn't play to his strengths, and it almost feels like he's got to expend a lot of energy elsewhere to get this down, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Weirdly, the stuff that hits a little bit better is the more normal stuff with Porsche McNeil, and like the storytelling there is a lot simpler. I kind of love the Spawn and Houdini stuff. I love Houdini in this like backwards chair,
Yeah,
sitting
Rikering
on a
right there.
rooftop.
He's
Yeah,
no, I do kind of like it, and what Houdini's saying about magic is maybe probably the best idea in the script, where he's kind of comparing it to like, instead of doing an illusion that the audience perceives, you do an illusion that the universe perceives. That's actually a pretty interesting magical thought, not too far off from a lot of, practicing magicians. Again, there's a little bit of chaos magic in that, so maybe it's one of the most interesting concepts presented here. I like where he conjures a bomb and it's straight up Looney Tunes bomb, and Spawn's cape basically absorbs the explosion.
feels a little bit also like a Grant Morrison, like Flex Mentallo.
Right, it kind of does, yes. So similar, I think, DNA in that. I like when he asks Spawn to conjure a marble, like a small glass marble, and he
Yeah.
conjures a marble bust of like basically Wanda.
So what's really funny about that specifically shows up in the very first page of Daring Escapes. And it's Houdini talking about how how this was like a classic mix-up. This happens all the time when you're teaching
Waka
somebody
waka.
magic. But that this marble is not marble at all. It's actually made of pure hellite.
Okay.
So that's it. Anyway,
Great.
moving
So
on.
Spawn failed in all respects. Made
Yeah,
a bust of a
It was not
material that is not marble.
Yeah,
So
exactly.
Spawn fucked it up. You gotta hate that for him. His first try out of the gate. Then, out of nowhere, these three goons come up on the gate, and I don't know what they're planning to do up here. Probably drugs. But they see Spawn and Houdini, and they're like, let's kill them. And their names are Brains, Divvy, and Smokey. And that becomes important in a moment, because as Spawn's beating them up with his chains and his costume.
Oh, and Link.
Oh, and Link. Okay, yeah, you're right. Spawn's chains beat up Link's chains. Houdini turns them all into like their namesakes. So like Brain's brain comes out of his head. Divvy is divided in half, and Smokey is turned to smoke. That feels like the kind of thing that when whichever, I'm gonna guess Andrew Grossberg maybe was writing that and scripting that, he really thought that was great. Smokey and Divvy. Turns out they're not actually tortured to death in horrible ways, like Spectre-esque ways. It's just an illusion that they're gonna wake up from, Houdini says. Here's where things get weird to me with Houdini and Spawn, is that Houdini's like, you want to be my driver of my magical Rolls Royce, and gives Spawn a fucking chauffeur's outfit.
The hat kills me. He wears the hat for the whole rest of this issue and the next one.
The optics of this are a little weird to me. Honestly,
it is a little driving
like, you
Mr.
wanna,
Houdini.
Yeah, you want to be my driver and put on a driver's uniform, Spawn. I think it's just one of those things that when you actually think through it, Spawn puts on the hat and he's like, I'm gonna drive. And it's like a terrible, terrible panel. We end with Terry on the next page asleep with Wanda and Cyan. They're obviously fell asleep reading Cyan a bedtime story from Sleepy Tales. Terry gets a phone call from his government boss, Percy, who tells him to go check out the Ukrainian scientists because they're going to detonate an atomic device.
And he said, why couldn't the KGB handle this?
because they don't exist anymore, Terry, because it's 1993 or 4 at this point. And that's the problem. See, that's what I'm saying. Like they can't think beyond still Russian KGB, like, hello, I am Russian Guyevich KGB. And it's just flattening everything into these weird stereotypes, down to Spawn being a fucking chauffeur. And, you know, we have to give Todd credit for, as far as I know, never doing the chauffeur Spawn action figure, because it's just strange. And it just ends everything on a weird note. The ending of this is Terry going off, waking up and getting out of bed to go track down the atomic device. That's the ending of issue 19. Spawn number 20. Roll credits.
Moving on to Spawn number 20. Image Comics presents Showtime Part 2. Mostly the same. It's mostly the same credits. Story by Tom Orzechowski and Andrew Grossberg. Pencils by Greg Capullo. Now it's not, I don't think, by, or actually maybe it is by publication. Inks by Todd McFarlane and Mark Pennington. So this might be the first time that we get Todd inking Greg.
Certainly when reading in a chronological order, this is the first chronological appearance of Todd inking Greg. And
Mark Pennington's an interesting guy to have on board the Spawn team because he was Todd's inker for a lot of Spider-Man.
You know, some of that worked a lot better than on Capullo.
I agree. And that's because those Spider-Man issues, I was going through a couple of issues of the Perceptions arc with Wendigo and Wolverine. And man, some of those pages slam. But some of them are a lot of like, I'm going to mostly draw an outline of a body.
Yeah.
I'm going to draw mostly an outline of a body with like a couple of dashes through it. And then like, the colorist will add shadows kind of thing.
I will say you can kind of tell which pages Todd maybe inked and which ones Pennington inked. It's hard to get granular into that, but there are a few where it's like, yeah, it seems like Todd had a lot of fun with this. Yeah. Anyway, I'm interrupting the credits with this.
It's totally fine. Copy editor and letters, Tom Orzechowski. Color by Steve Oliff and Ollie Optics. Ollie Optics this time is Tracy Anderson, Stacey Cox, Houlis, Kirk Mobert, Patty Stratton-Jordan, Nathan Eyring, Marie St. Clair, Mo Sampson, Quinn Suplee, Christ Wolf, Breck Blackford, and Robin Robertson. Director of Creative Development, Terry Fitzgerald. Graphics Coordinator, Julia Simmons. So a little bit of a change up from Ollie Optics there. This first page is pretty fun. I like this like chitty chitty bang bang ass like Spawn driving Houdini around thing. I like the license plate being S-Cape.
S-Cape. Houdini's got this cape flying out here. I think this is the Todd page. I want to say, I think the attention to detail is a little cleaner. I think there's a little bit less of the kind of blocky, kind of chunky inking that it seems Pennington does in the previous issue. I kind of like, as we're talking about Houdini and his portrayal, I do actually like Capullo's drawing of him. I think his likeness is recognizable, and I think it's pretty good. I think, it's always a little weird when you bring a historical person into a comic like this in a fictional setting, especially one that maybe contrasts with their values. But I think the portrayal of his face is nice.
I like him on the cover too because he's doing like a hand thing, like Spawn tends to do.
Right. Yeah.
So that's cool.
Very kind of Doctor Strangey in a way. And you get, now that I think about it, with the overlap and everything, it really feels like Houdini is meant to be the like Doctor Strange analog here. Very
especially
much
with
so.
The cape and everything.
Just really hitting me with that cover and everything. Yep, definitely.
If it wasn't Houdini, who would you have it be? If we had to pick a different historical
figure, then still, I guess technically, I don't know if it's historical or necessarily mythological or whatever, but I think Cagliostro would have been the obvious choice here.
Yeah, it has to be, right?
Yeah.
I agree.
Seems like that would have been the intent, but deals are deals and money is money and lawsuits are
And
lawsuits
you gotta
and
soft launch your
you
Harry Houdini
got to soft
miniseries.
launch your Harry Houdini dangerous escapes or whatever, daring escapes. Sure, it sold bundles. People loved it, I bet. So they're just defying gravity in his magical Harry Potter car, and we get a lot of close-ups of Spawn's hat as they're tracking this kid. He sees Terry down there, and he's like, "Oh shit! I can't let Wanda be a widow again."
Oh yeah.
Basically, what happens is Terry goes up to this Ukrainian diner or whatever it is, where the scientists slash mobsters slash guys who want to blow up the city with an atomic bomb are hiding. And he says in Ukrainian or Russian rather, he says, "Excuse me, please, gentlemen. I am Special Agent Fitzgerald with the U.S. government. May I ask you some questions?" I just want to say, first off, like obviously he's not trying to infiltrate them here. He's trying to just be a normal agent. But just the way the idea of these secret government agents are treated in Spawn is so funny to me because they're all celebrities. They're all just like, "Hi, I'm Secret Government Assassin Fitzgerald. I'm here to discuss your bomb plans." And they're like, "Come on inside. It's warmer." And he's like, "Oh, great. Sounds great." And they just start kicking the shit out of him. He says. He says their accent needs practice, little spy. Let us teach you. Which, like, is he really a spy if he
He
just
wasn't
walks
really
up and
spying. He
says,
just said his
like,
name and where he works.
yeah, it's like if he walked up and said, "Hey, I'm the U.S. spy, the official spy attached to your unit." And that's when Spawn busts in the chauffeur cap and says, "Leave him alone. That's my friend."
What's everybody lately's deal with not having Spawn wearing his mask?
Todd draws him mostly that way throughout a lot of this. I think Spawn just doesn't like wearing it if he doesn't have to. And maybe the mask isn't there because the costume's alive and it's retracted or something. They just like drawing Spawn's face. You know, it's maybe a little easier to draw than the like shapes of his mask and all angles and stuff. Maybe
I
the
mean,
mask would look
they
weird
put
with the
his
hat.
face
I
in
don't fucking
darkness
know.
most of the time anyway.
Yeah, I don't
But it
know.
does strike me as odd. It's not often that we get a hero that wears a mask that then just straight up doesn't wear a mask.
Yeah, I mean it's very MCU, like very like Tony Stark, Tom Holland, Spider Man. Like they always have their masks off through like the last third of the movie. This is through like the most third of all comic. Uh, but he goes inside. He chains them all up. He carries Terry out, and he says like, "What? That's Volkolov in front of the punk's building, or I'm not dead. I knew this thing stank, but not that bad." Like the scripting here is terrible. He sees the agent who's gonna blow up the bomb going into Porsche McNeil's apartment, which is across from the Ukrainian deli where all these guys work.
Which is right. So that's where the alleyway is then?
I guess, dude. I don't know.
That's where Spawn lives? Spawn lives in little Ukraine?
Maybe. Maybe so. Maybe Spawn lives in all alleys everywhere. Maybe there is but one alley, and it is the true alley.
Is it like a Danny
Alley,
the Street
Danny the
situation?
alley. Yeah, maybe
Danny the
so.
Alley?
I don't
For
know.
listeners who are not aware of Danny the Street, Danny the Street is a character from Grant Morrison's Doom Patrol, who is a sentient street
Yeah,
who can
Sentient Street.
teleport amongst different cities and
Cities and
things,
towns. Anywhere there's
that allows
streets.
it allows Doom Patrol to get around. In Gerard Way's Doom Patrol, Danny becomes an ambulance.
Yeah, Danny the ambulance.
I will say one of the best episodes of the Doom Patrol show was Danny getting introduced.
Yeah, I love that. I watched I need to
Really
catch
great.
up on that. First season was great. I just haven't
Yeah.
gone back to it yet because sometimes I forget. I hear that it's really good. I need to catch up on it, honestly. We get more talking heads. They're talking about the carousing, the undignified carousing of the Ukrainian diplomat scientists, basically just putting them on blast on the news for going out to the titty bar, which is
Wait.
the way news is covered in this universe is bizarre. It's
So wait.
intense.
in the compendium, did they fix the coloring for our guy?
What do you mean?
What color is his hair in your copy?
Oh, white, stark white.
It's white in mine too.
Yeah, yeah.
But it was blonde before. Did he just age a lot in the last?
Capullo draws him very much like Vincent Price.
Yeah. Rumor has it that our visiting Eastern European dignitaries did some decidedly undignified carousing last night and showed up at all the wrong parties. Need a bromo, comrades? Seems one of your
Bromo.
pals is still out sleeping it off.
They're
That's
just
how he
talking
talks to
about
me.
how Volokov, and I might have said Volokov, the visiting scientist from the East-West Atomic Warfare Science and Applications Conference, is
Oh my
still
goodness.
unaccounted for. There is so much transparency with the media and secret government operations and like all this shit in Spawn's universe. It's incredible.
In a weird way, though, isn't that true of our actual world? Like, remember when we found out that the government was like, no, we are definitely spying on your cell phones, and everybody went, sick. Like,
Yeah.
there weren't protests. It was just like, all right, great.
There's
a Pete Holmes joke about this in his recent special where he's just like, yeah, it's unsurprising that the government does the things they do to us because we're the same people who like show up at Times Square and count down the year starting. You know, it was also a year ago. Today was also a year ago. Oh no,
Yeah.
but I only care about January 1st.
Right.
Anyway,
I like the talking head from the final guy here, whose call sign isn't even shown off this time. He
he's
just
on
basically
YouTube
says,
now.
it's all about the money. The Russians have all the romance and limelight of big changes. What gets lost in the shuffle is that the other ex-Soviet republics are also struggling for a new system. They need money too. The Ukraine, where Volokov is from, could use even a fifth of the aid that's been promised to Russia, which, like, probably true. I mean, a lot of those, Eastern Bloc and Soviet Bloc countries got left in the dust by the changeover from a communism to, their current system. We'll call it that. So anyway, Spawn's out here looking for the scientist. Houdini flies by in his car and picks him
I have a
up.
question. Can Spawn stick to walls?
I think he's chained up.
Is
But
he?
maybe he can.
I don't know. It's weird.
I bet his costume can do whatever the artist wants it to do, to be honest.
That's a good point.
I don't think it's that crazy that his costume could do that, I don't think it's that out of the question. Houdini flies by in his car. They decide to go to the conference where Porsche McNeil has finally finished creating the detonator for the atomic bomb. Volokov decides to go out and give his audience, which a bunch of people have shown up to see whatever demonstration Volokov is about to give.
I will note that there's not that many people in the audience.
No,
like if you look at the art, it's not full.
No, but there's a surprising amount. It says a surprisingly large turnout for the dry topic at hand. The only conference participants only the conference participants or devout weaponry wonks would be interested in finely engineered atomic detonators. So he's going to give a conference on detonators.
I will say the thing that I really like about the way that this is kind of set up is it is kind of shot like a magic trick.
Right.
That's kind of fun. Considering there's the big red, curtain in the background, the sort of attention to detail where he's like handling the briefcase gingerly and showing each element as he's kind of going through it.
Right. It does very much look like that kind of a stage on which magic would be performed or whatever. That does seem to be the vibe here. He unveils the bomb and says he's going to present his demands. Ukraine has languished in poverty while her cousin Russia has gained all the attention of the world. It's time for this to end. You and your government shall loan my Ukraine $1.5 billion, $1 billion per kiloton of my device here, or I shall destroy New York City. Someone says, atomic terrorist, Percy was right, holy. And then Spawn shouts, guns, commies with guns. And then Houdini draws out Joker's gun from the end of Batman in 1989 and says, and a sorcerer with a bigger gun. So
Great.
here's where we get more of the overlap, the overlappers, where they're talking about finally they get to test more atomic explosives on Being from Hell, that being Al Simmons, the Hellspawn. And also, they're going to blow up Houdini, who they can't stand because he's found his way into their realm. Spawn jumps in front of Terry Fitzgerald, who's about to get shot, saving his life. The bomb gets detonated and armed. There's a countdown.
I do out loud the sound effects because
Right.
they're kind of fun, like squeep and
Squeep.
bitty, bitty,
Bitty, bitty,
bitty, bitty.
bitty,
I was
bitty,
like,
bitty.
yeah, all right, the tracks.
Bitty, bitty, bitty. So, yeah, I don't think that's I don't know if Bolshemoyev is spelled right there. I don't speak Russian. It may be spelled differently.
Does Capullo's Houdini also kind of look like a Howard Chaykin drawing to you?
Yeah, he kind of does. He does have
Kind
a
of like
little bit of that
Chaykin-esque.
flag.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking too. I think it's just partly this one with the countdown, this page with the countdown where he's like gritting his teeth and he's got his hair kind of doing his thing.
Yeah, okay, so he says Bolshemoy, but that's spelled wrong. It's not Boja, I believe, according to Google, as I thought. It's Bozhe. Now, Boja may be an accepted spelling in the translation from Cyrillic to the Arabian alphabet, but I don't think so. I think that's just they didn't have Google at the time, so they kind of
Yeah.
went for it. There's a countdown.
And then Houdini is gonna really focus on this blast. He's like channeling the blast, and then reality shatters. And the idea is that he has brought the blast out of our world so that we don't blow up.
Yeah, and he sent it to the overlap. It's sort of like the end of Avengers, where Tony Stark guides the nuke through the portal to the Chitauri ship. It's sort of like that, and he sends all the energy of the blast into the overlap, saving the world and basically blinking out of existence, leaving only his cape, which was blue a moment ago, but on this page is colored as Spawn's cape. All the scientists are like, it vanished. There's a whole thing here. They arrest Volokov and Porsche McNeil. Spawn tries to go back to Houdini's car.
And he applies the lessons that he's learned. The car is invisible, so he focuses on the car and it appears. He goes to drive it, but Houdini had the keys, so he conjures the key, and then the car disappears because he has passed Houdini's tests.
So, also, I want to point out here CNN is just reporting that there has been an attempted nuclear terrorist action at Columbia University. Can you imagine the impact that would have on the world if that in any capacity there was an actual credible nuclear threat on American soil at any point? It would just be absolute chaos. Anyway,
Yeah.
so that's another thing that I think points to the idea that these scripts are written from a very juvenile perspective towards these issues and these ideas and the ramifications of what they would mean. It's written with a very, I don't know another way to say it, very juvenile and very basic, very Stanley Silver Age kind of Cold War vision of these simplified black and white concepts.
Yeah.
It just points to them not thinking it through. The writer's not thinking that through. And honestly, frankly, to be fair to them, not that different from Avengers comic books or Justice League or anything else, where every other week there's a new, the Gablorgalaxes are invading and they've decimated half of the city. Just goes by. And I think that's just something that the more real world orientation you put on that, the less sense it makes.
And I think that that's why it's really important that to this point, Spawn has, despite being a world famous government assassin, doesn't, we don't really get into his past missions very much. They're kind of
It's come
amorphous
up a
and they're
couple
kind of,
times, but they're
but they're not,
usually in the terms of like who lived, who died, that kind of
right.
thing.
It's not like we were doing this because the government needed to do X, Y, and Z. It's more
Right.
just like you got sent here and this other thing happened to you specifically.
Well, and also I think this is a little, in some ways, a little silly and defiant of who Spawn is and why he spawned, because we've learned before that the reason Al Simmons was killed was because he began questioning these orders to go kill people,
Right.
questioning these orders to go be a government assassin. And so he was sold out by his boss, Jason Wynn, killed by his ex colleague, Chapel, and
Well,
him
for
immediately,
now,
right at this point in
we'll
the
get into it.
continuity, believes or whatever. Anyway, him snapping immediately back to commies with guns,
Yeah.
it's indicative of like maybe what the politics of a person who would be a government assassin are, but it's also maybe a little bit underselling what the journey of Al Simmons is supposed to have been to this point.
I think also now we've seen a handful of writers tackle Spawn, and we talked about it a little bit in the last episode about how like Grant really gets to get into it and do an impression of Todd doing Spawn, right? Being like, "Oh, this
Right.
is the voice of Spawn. I will do my best to emulate that voice, but do it my way." Whereas some of the other writers were like, "I'm going to avoid it altogether by not really involving Al Simmons because he's not my character." Or you get this sort of like Frank Miller, like it's the Frank Miller thing again, where it's just like he's just a tough superhero guy, and there's nothing to really give him to
Well,
do other than that, to the
like
point where Grossberg and Orzechowski can't have him do anything except drive a different character around.
the thing that I think is interesting, something not even interesting, this is bizarre. Okay. Couple things. Porsche McNeil's arrested. He then goes back to his house, which, if you're arrested for threat of nuclear detonation, you're not going back to your little apartment later that night. He goes in there and his apartment explodes, and it's all confetti. And there's a note from Spawn that says, "Don't ever mess with me or my alley again, or the next one takes out you and the whole building with it." Which, what the fuck, Spawn? You're just doing the same terrorism back. Second of all, how is he just home on bail from a nuclear threat? That's not happening. Again, just a very juvenile thought process of writing here. We cut back to the overlap. They say they're going to take all the scientists or whatever who were teleported out and test the effects of the nuclear energy of the realm on them. Then the story ends with Houdini successfully completing the trick that was foreshadowed in the very first panel of the story, which was like a clipping of the newspaper. So we
Yeah.
end on Houdini successful in his mission against the overlap. Here's what I was going to say, what all that leads me to. Part of the reason I breezed through that is that this is not a Spawn story.
No, it's a
This
Houdini
is a
story.
Houdini story. It opens and ends on Houdini, and it's very ultimately ironic and maybe a little salty and sardonic that Spawn is dressed in a chauffeur's uniform because he and his title are merely the vehicle for this secondary pilot to dangerous, daring escapes. And it's sucks.
Considering that Orzechowski is the co-writer, is it Todd just giving like a, "Hey Tom, I get that you need a platform to maybe help launch this thing. Here you go."
Maybe
I
so.
mean,
Maybe
Daring
it
Escapes
is.
doesn't come out for 4 years.
Judging, Pierce, judging by the way the order of issues came out, it's very possible that they just needed a fill in. And
Yeah.
Todd was like, okay, just adapt your story to have Spawn in it. Adapt the
Yeah.
Houdini story to have Spawn in it. It's very, very possible that that's what happened. Now, I think it's fine. I don't want to jump ahead into issue 21, but I did actually turn the page, and there's an editor's note on the second page of issue 21 that says, "See issues 19 and 20, not out yet." So it's a little all over the place, and there's evidence of that. Anyway, yeah, this is a story about Houdini and his daring escapes and the overlap, and barely tying into the mythos of Spawn at all, or even the character and the deeds of Spawn outside of like kind of seemingly shoehorning him in.
It is the most fill-in of anything that we've gotten so far. Because I think you could even make the argument that the Frank Miller issue is a little bit has a fill-in feel, but at
Even more
least
than the
it's like
rest of the Coco
I
Swiss.
don't I don't know tech Coco Swiss Techno Gangs. At least you're like, well, those could come back. Houdini's never coming back. He just exploded an atomic bomb in a not hell, not purgatory. Like I
And
think
then
that's
went
the other
back
thing.
to the 20s
The overlap doesn't
or the
play
early
in.
19th,
Like,
20th century.
yeah, like the overlap though it's not even like it's one of the levels of like hell that we had seen before. Like
No,
that had
it's
already
like a
been established.
separate thing.
Yeah.
It's another separate third force. Like, okay, you had Cagliostro and the other still unnamed guy hint at like forces beyond heaven and hell. It's one of
Yeah.
those, but it's not one that matters. It's one that
No.
is just also evil and weird.
It will
And
never show up again.
not
Harry
in not
Houdini
in
will never
Spawn.
not in Spawn. Harry Houdini will never show up again. Spawn will appear in flashback in Daring Escapes #1.
Yeah,
And Harry Houdini will directly reference the events of these two issues in the beginning of that miniseries. That's it. That's it. There's
yeah.
nothing. There's
It's
nothing
not
more there.
it's tough. It's tough.
Yeah.
Honestly, Pierce, final thoughts on these issues. Honestly, this is going to clock in at maybe our shortest episode yet. We breezed through a lot of that, more than we usually do. We didn't highlight a lot of Greg Capullo's art. Honestly, not his best work. Even the pages that it looked like Todd inked.
Yeah,
I
yeah, really not his best work, and it's not even his fault, I don't think.
no,
I think that it's such an uninteresting issue that it was almost like I didn't sign up to draw this.
right.
Like,
He showed up to draw
uh,
Spawn. He's
I
drawing
also
chauffeur
wonder
Spawn.
I also wonder what the timeline was in terms of having to get it done,
Yeah.
because that feels like part of it as well. The fact that Todd jumps into helping ink with Pennington means he's
Mm-hmm.
definitely done with Spawn Batman. He's
Or
also
Spawn Batman's
drawn.
even further delayed because of it.
Yeah. I will get into a little bit of the. I mean, final thoughts is this arc is not good. I do like that Spawn gets to learn a little bit about his magical powers and how they work, and we'll see how that plays moving forward. It sucks that it wasn't Cagliostro or a character that's going to matter more to the overall story of Spawn. I know that it must have been a little confusing for folks who read these issues out of order because of what happens in Spawn Batman, and we'll get into that next week. But in Spawn Batman, he ties his face up with a shoelace, and he says that he ran into some bozo in black. Harry Houdini also wears black, so
Yeah,
it it's
it's a whole thing. It's
yeah.
you know my final thoughts, I just think, especially coming after an arc that was a 2-issue arc that was so much fun from Grant Morrison
Three.
and Greg Capullo, a 3-issue arc, I'm sorry, yes, from Grant Morrison and Greg Capullo, seeing this 2-issue arc where it's Capullo doing his best, to really try and work with what he's got. And honestly, a story that just doesn't work at all. The bits that we get that are actually related to Spawn and how Spawn works are maybe the best parts,
Yeah.
but there's just so much to dislike that we didn't even do what we usually do and dig into like the things, like the little bits to find joy in, because it's tough. It's a really
Yeah.
tough little arc, 2-issue arc, to find much excitement in, the way that even the weirdest and maybe kind of worst issues of Spawn up to this point have had moments of greatness or moments that touch greatness or remind you of the greatness that's possible. This just feels like they had to get something out because they literally forgot to do these issues.
It does feel like that. It's like forgetting to do your homework and doing it like in the cafeteria before school starts
Yeah.
and just kind of turning anything in. The thing that's actually a little bit fun are as always, the spawning ground, the letters column. I do really appreciate having the single issues for this reason.
Yeah, of
I think
course.
it's really important for the show as well. And one thing that's noted in issue 19 is there was a character named Blood introduced in, what was it introduced in? Image number 0. That is Blood, Bludd,
Okay.
created by Todd McFarlane. At this point, this is 1994. We're kind of going back in time with our next bunch of coverage, but in 1994, Todd's Toys had begun. And we actually get the ads for the first wave of Spawn toys. And it's Spawn, Medieval Spawn, Violator, Overt Kill, Clown, and Tremor.
Yeah.
And there's a letter about like, hey, Tremor looks a lot like Blood. And Todd goes, you are right in that the character originally called Blood has been changed to Tremor. The reason for this change was quite simple. Although I had given him the name over 10 years ago, I felt that it would be stepping on Rob Liefeld's toes, who seems to have a corner with anything using the word blood. So in considerations of Rob's work, I decided to rename the character to Tremor. His first appearance will be out next week in issue number 25 of Spawn, drawn by Mark Silvestri. And yes, I did say next week. I also agree that Mark Pennington is a talent and a nice person and will continue to work with him for as long as he wishes to work with me. There's also like a funny bit about the 3 issues coming out in a row where he says the upside is that the mere fact that you will be getting 3 separate Spawn issues in 3 consecutive weeks, considering I've rarely had 2 books come out a month apart, 3 books in 3 weeks looks like a miracle. So
always the pragmatist, always honestly kind of a straight shooter with that kind of stuff. He'll always tell the fans like shit's late because I'm still writing it or something like that. You know, it's very interesting as opposed to the very kind of obfuscated and obscured way that comics often come out now, where they announce something as like an ongoing series and then like 4 issues later it ends. And it's like, was this ever intended to go to issue 5? Probably not. You know,
yeah,
stuff happens.
yeah, especially right now, it feels like everything gets, like you said, everything gets promoted as an ongoing, and then you just kind of get the runaround about whether or not it was ever going to be. In issue 20, there's a great. We already talked about Tony Twist previously in that lawsuit, but somebody sent in a letter that said, "Dear Todd, is it just me, or are there a lot of Quebec Nordiques in your stories?" Quebec Nordiques were an NHL franchise in the early 90s. They eventually moved to Colorado and become the Colorado Avalanche. And he says, "Good eyes, Rob. As a self-proclaimed hockey fanatic, you are absolutely correct in noticing hockey players' names in my book. Sometimes I use their full names and sometimes just their last. Let's make a checklist of some of the names I've used so far. Burke, Williams, Sakic, Twist, Linden, Roenick, and a few others I can't think of right now. I love hockey, so the current strike is killing me right now. But you will continue to see current and past hockey players' names in my books. This is not just particular to Spawn either, as I had Wayne Gretzky all over the Spider-Man book I wrote."
I mean, I think using someone's last name is a little different than just putting straight like first, last, and nickname into this into this book, like naming it directly after like last names. I think that's something a lot of people play with in comics. You know, you got to take inspiration from somewhere, but it is very funny to see Todd just being like, here's all the potential lawsuits I've opened myself up to.
I'm putting it out here now that Todd, if you're listening, if you ever listen, I am part of a children's roller hockey league. And if you will sponsor the league in any way, I will let you name all the teams.
Hell yeah, that'd be sick. Todd, do
you
it.
You can call one the Spawn. You can call one the Malbolgia. We probably can't call any of the teams the Violators.
No.
But
you call one the Fleabiacs.
The Fleabiac brothers. The 5 famous Fleabiac brothers. That team only has 5 players.
Yeah, they're incredible though.
The last thing is, I will say the pinups in these issues are nothing. I would say nothing to write home about. I do love the very 90s like graphic design ads. I guess this is Julia Simmons' work in the back pages here. Because these fonts are really something. Take a look at this.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, there's a lot going on there. And
Wow.
we
Graphic
do
design is
get
my passion.
we do get the first look at the toys here. And they look
Yeah.
sick.
Yeah, they do. I still have some of those.
So
They're still great toys. They were so enticing when I was like 12, 13. I was at an age where I still want today and collect toys. I still wanted them, but I felt like I was getting too old for like some of the Ninja Turtles and that kind of staples. They came out at the exact right time to like transition young adults into like an adult collector mindset, really pioneered that concept. So
yeah.
thank you, Todd, for doing that and making sure that to this day I have way too many fucking toys. I just started collecting Marvel Legends. I have a limited number of them I
Oh
want,
no.
but I'm
Oh
I'll
buddy.
tell you, we'll get into a little toy talk for just a moment. You remember were you old enough ever to have any of the Secret Wars toys from the early 80s, the
No.
Kenner ones? I did, and I loved them as a kid. I had most of them. So a couple weeks ago, got on sale a 2-pack of classic Monaco Rambo and Secret Wars style Doom.
It's cool.
Love that. Love that. My first Marvel Legends toys. And so I was like, I love the Secret Wars Doom. I'm going to collect some of the other Marvel Legends of like the characters that were in that line. So giving myself a finite limit. I don't want to wind up with 3,000 toys here.
This is how I feel about all of the NECA Ninja Turtles. So
Right.
I feel you.
Yeah.
And I'm probably about to get more of the Universal Monsters crossovers, but it is what it is.
All right. Well, that's Toy Talk with
Anyway,
George and Pierce.
also, Todd, if you want to send us any toys, we will talk about them on the show.
I will review the shit out of them.
100%.
Absolutely.
100%.
I have a whole collection of vintage spawns.
We should maybe do an episode about them then.
That would be fun. Honestly,
Really
that would be a
cool.
really good one.
We should have Lan on because I know Lan talks about toys a lot.
Yeah, we could. We could have a guest on. That'd be a fun little bonus episode thing.
Cool. All right, well, I think this might be our shortest episode. Next week we get into actually a pretty good one. It's a one-shot. Spawn Batman, baby.
All right.
Gonna be a lot of fun. If you want to follow us on the internet, we are on Twitter, but fuck Twitter at Spawnography Pod. But we are on Blue Sky at Spawnography. We're on Instagram at Spawnography. We're not on Facebook because I barely use it. We're on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, all that junk, Google Podcasts. Please rate, review, subscribe. George, where can folks find you?
You can find me on if I'm on social media, it's probably Blue Sky and maybe Instagram now and then. My @ is Crypt Trash. Yeah, and you can also read my writing every mother freaking day at newsarama.com.
Awesome. Yeah, you can find me at PE Lightning on, I guess I gotta be more active on Blue Sky and Threads or whatever.
It's fun. Comic art.
Yeah, that's true. And you can listen to our bands as well.
Oh yeah.
My band is called Power Trash. George did the theme music for the show. Hypersleep, and you have a new one too as well, right?
Yeah, I just started releasing some music on YouTube right now only. It's at Witch Crisis.
Hell yeah.
Yep. So check that out.
This has been another episode of Spawnography.
For God so loved the world,
he gave his only begotten Spawn. Have a good one, y'all. Thanks for listening.
Spawnography!